Peace and love, family. Welcome back to the Hope, the HOPE, helping our people elevate. If you're new here, welcome to the channel. To our returners, welcome, family. In 1951, a black man in North Carolina was convicted, not for violence, not for theft, but for something they called reckless eyeballing. His so-called crime, a white woman claimed that he looked at her too long, and that was enough to destroy his life. Today, I'm reacting to another Julian Johnson's powerful legal breakdown of the Mack Ingram case. As always, Julian brings the facts, and we're going to talk about what this case really says about America then and now. This is about more than one man. It's about how fear, racism, and the laws worked hand in hand to keep black people in chains long after slavery ended. Let's get into it. Peace and love.
On behalf of Akuno Sanko for Bay, you know what I'm saying? Jay, where you at? We're trying to help our people elevate. Hope. HOPE. We're giving them hope. We doing what we gotta do, you know. Every day, one step at a time, man. We gonna make it happen. Helping our people elevate. Sometimes I practice focus, thought, and meditate. I'm trying to come with other ways to help our people elevate. And seeking knowledge make me levitate. The lifted mental state is what results from how we orchestrate. This for the family's sake. Let's self-reflect and self-evaluate. And every day, make sure the steps you take, you calculate. Receive a master's fate. I know I can't exist without the hate, but that's okay. I balance that with higher self today. Success is on this way, and after that, my flesh can pass away.
This story highlights how justice and due process were concepts that did not apply to black people. If you were black, the government could and would do anything it wanted to a black person. Lies would be accepted as truth, and the law would be twisted and contorted to ensure that a black person would get the unjust outcome that Jim Crow wanted. This story is just one of thousands. Before I get into what happened, let me set the stage for you first with some historical context. This information is going to help you center what we're going to talk about in this video. So give me a few moments to give you some history first, and then I'll get into what happened. When we think of the NAACP, we think of Thurgood Marshall and the battle to end legal racial segregation in America. The NAACP was instrumental in helping to dismantle many legal barriers that kept black people in second-class citizenship. In 1944, the NAACP won a case called Smith versus Allwright. Many states held white-only primaries that prevented black people from voting. The NAACP represented Dr. Lonnie E. Smith, a dentist from Houston, Texas, who was denied the right to vote in a primary election. The NAACP victory in this case ended the decades-long practice of white-only primaries and began the process of getting black people the right to the ballot. In 1948, it won the case of Shelley versus Kramer, getting the U.S. Supreme Court to strike down race-based restrictive housing covenants. The organization represented a black couple, J.D. and Ethel Shelley, who tried to buy a home in St. Louis in 1945. The neighborhood the Shelleys wanted to move in had a racial covenants that prohibited homes from being sold to black people. A white couple objected to the Shelleys' purchase. The NAACP argued the case all the way to the Supreme Court and won the case.
I like how he presents these news articles because he gives you the facts on these stories so people can't just say he's making stuff up. But this article says all we wanted was a decent place to rear the children, Negro mother says. And so showing you, even also just dealing with this whole status thing, because he always talk about black, and I always say a little bit. But during this time frame, they weren't classified as black. They were labeled as Negro, even though in Spanish, Negro means black, same thing.
Allowing black families to live where they wanted. And in 1954, the NAACP won one of the most important cases in the fight for equal rights. On May 17, 1954, the U.S. Supreme Court issued a landmark decision in Brown versus the Board of Education, ruling that segregation in public schools was unconstitutional. This decision undid the unjust legal doctrine of separate but equal. School segregation was just one of the many ways that the United States imposed a caste system on black people. Before Brown, 0% of black students attended a majority white school. There are many more important cases that the NAACP was involved in and won on behalf of black Americans. But before the NAACP took on those cases, many of the organization's fights centered around litigating cases where black people were denied fair criminal trials and were being sentenced to death with no due process. And the number one crime that black men were being sent to death for were allegations of attacking white women. The NAACP represented hundreds of black men in these cases. While Thurgood Marshall is known for arguing a series of cases before the Supreme Court that dismantled legal segregation, the first case that he ever argued before the Supreme Court was a 1943 case called Adams versus the United States. It involved 3 black soldiers who were accused of attacking a white woman. Constance Baker Motley was the first black woman to ever argue a case before the U.S. Supreme Court. The case that she argued, a 1961 case called Hamilton versus Alabama, involved a black man who was denied the right to counsel and sentenced to death after being accused of attacking a white woman. Black people were being lynched by mobs and by courts in these cases. The NAACP took them on because they were about more than just an accusation that was often used to inflict violence and injustice on black people. They were about fairness and due process and equality. The law had to be applied equally to all. But for black people, due process and notions of fair play were out of reach in Southern courts. These cases helped to strengthen criminal procedure protections for black people. They helped to eliminate jury discrimination and denial of access to an attorney, and the use of coerced confessions, all things that were occurring to black people in Southern court systems. In this video, I want to tell you about a lesser known case that really highlights just how black people were treated by Jim Crow courts. It involves a black man who was accused and convicted of trying to attack a white woman after he looked at her. He never touched her or said anything to her, just looked at her. Mack Ingram was born on June 6, 1910 in Yanceyville, North Carolina, to Isom and Elise Ingram. Mack was one of about 6 kids. His family were farmers. Mack's family had been to North Carolina since the days of slavery. His father, Isom, was born in 1863, which means that he might have experienced slavery before the 13th Amendment abolished slavery in 1865. The 1860 U.S. Census slave schedules shows a man named James Ingram owning slaves in Caswell County, where Mack's father, Isom, was born. It's possible that James Ingram owned Mack's family. In October of 1933, Mack married Linwood Jeffries. Linwood was born in July of 1910 to Elisha and Lucy Jeffries. Her family, like Mack's, was from North Carolina and worked as farmers and sharecroppers. Mack and Linwood ended up having 9 children. In 1944, Yanceyville was segregated just like the rest of the South. It was a tobacco farm city near the Virginia border. Despite living in injustice, Mack and Linwood managed to survive and managed to thrive in it. Mack was well known in his community and had a reputation for being a hard-working farmer who took care of his family. People in the small community knew Mack for being someone who cared for others. In addition to caring for his family, Mack would also drive people to the welfare office and around town when they needed assistance. He was a kind and gentle and caring man. But despite the fact that Mack was kind and caring, it could not save him from injustice. His hard-working demeanor was not enough to keep him out of the clutches of injustice and racism in Jim Crow, North Carolina. Because he was a black man, that meant that sooner or later, Jim Crow was going to come looking for him. And that's exactly what happened. In June of 1951, Mack and his family were doing what they always did during that time of the year. They were farming their land and trying to survive. On the morning of June 4th, 1951, Mack needed to haul some hay, but he did not have a trailer. Now, this was no issue for him because he knew that he could rent a trailer from one of the white farmers in town, like he had done many times before. Mack left his home and headed to the farm of Aubrey Boswell. Boswell was a farmer that Mack knew very well and had rented from in the past. Mack drove to the Boswell farm. When he got there, he looked to see if Aubrey was around. He got out of his car and looked out into the field. Mack thought he saw Aubrey's 3 sons working. After not seeing Aubrey around, Mack left and got back in his car and went to another farm to rent the trailer. After leaving the Boswell's farm, Mack didn't think any more about it. He went on with his day. He got a trailer and he loaded the hay and went back to working in the fields. As far as he was concerned, it was just another Monday. But Mack was wrong. His life was about to change forever. What Mack didn't know was that as he was hauling hay in the trailer he rented after leaving the Boswells, the police were preparing to arrest him for Jim Crow's #1 crime. Back at the Boswell's farm, the family was hysterical. Willa Jean Boswell, Aubrey's 17-year-old daughter, had claimed that Mack had chased her and tried to attack her. Willa told a story that set in motion a series of events that highlighted just how far Jim Crow would go to inflict injustice on a black person.
I just want to say, I'll add on something that I realized throughout my studying, watching movies, watching film, reading books, listening to different videos. White women always wanted black men, even on slave plantations. And I'm not going to go deep with this, but there were times when black men would turn, so-called black men would turn so-called white women down. And in her reaction or her response, she would say that he did something to her. I just saw a video on Instagram where a young white girl was dating this young black boy, and one of her exes had got falsely accused of a crime, and her parents sent him to prison for like a crime he didn't do or something. And then he had seen the girl's phone. I'll probably find that video and share it on her too.
What in the get out is going on here? So I saw this on X, y'all, and I had to share this with y'all. So this couple, this interracial couple, went on a date, right? Now this dude posted this on Facebook originally and it went viral. He said, "This is why I don't usually date outside my race." Now, if y'all have never seen the movie Get Out, you better go watch it. So basically, he went out with this girl. They went on a date. That was the picture of them. And then she texted him saying, "I definitely enjoyed our night out, but I don't think my parents can find out about us. ... He said, "Same here. And why?" And she said, "They despise black guys. My last black boyfriend, let's just say it didn't go well. They literally set him up to be put in jail for life for something he didn't even do. Google Wellington. I really like you, but I don't want anything to happen to you." Not giving his government name. And then he replied and said, "I like you too. And yeah, that's crazy. I went to school with him. Maybe if you sat down and had a conversation with them, they'll loosen up. Think they would be down for dinner?" And she said, "I'll ask, LOL, because I really like you and I will not lose you." And then he said, "I don't want to lose you either." And then she basically said that her mom and stepdad would be open to meeting that evening. So I guess he meets the parents. He takes a screenshot of the dinner and shows receipts of the meeting. This is so creepy. So he took her phone and saw a message. This is so creepy, y'all. Saying this. He said, it says basically that was her talking to her mom, "Mommy love." He seems well put together, but it's something about him me and Jeff don't approve of. He seems like he would be good around the house for things we need, but not for a relationship. Tried to convince him to start working for us. And once we take a trip to the mountains this summer, well, know the rest. Well, you know the rest. What? And then she said, "Mom, I really like him. Can I at least keep him? He's very sweet." What? And then she said, "Not at all. Dating a black guy in the South, especially Mississippi, is not recommended. Do as you're instructed, please. You'll find someone better." And then she says, "Okay, I'll let him know that Jeff is hiring for work around the house." And like, what? He then posted this post on FB saying, "So this is why I stopped dating outside my race. Would be good and set up." And to this day, she still don't know that I saw those messages in her phone because I left afterwards and never said nothing else about it. Be careful out here, especially in Mississippi.
This is what Willa Jean claimed happened that morning. Willa Jean said that on that day, her father, her brothers, and her grandfather had been working in their tobacco field. She said at around 8:45 a.m., she left home to go to the field to help them. She said she had a hoe and was wearing dungarees and a plaid shirt. As she was walking along the road, she saw Mack Ingram driving on the highway. He was the only one in his car, and he was driving slowly at about 5 miles per hour. She said he drove very slow and kept looking at her, and he had his head out of the window as he stared at her. He did this until he was about 100 feet out of sight down the highway. Even though Willa Jean had seen Mack before, she said she was afraid of him because of how he had his head out of the window. She said that as she continued to walk to her family, she heard Mack's car go dead, as if he had stopped the car and turned it off. She said that's when she got really scared and began to run. She said she then saw Mack walking fast across the field towards her and that he got within about 75 feet of her. She said Mack stopped near a patch of bushes and watched her as she walked away. It was at this point that she reached her brothers, who were working in the field. She said she was hysterical and scared and crying. She asked her brothers who the man was. Her brother said that it was Mack Ingram. They knew him. She then told her brothers what happened. The brothers quickly ran to get their father. Willa's father called the sheriff. When the sheriff arrived at their home, Willa repeated what I just told you. After hearing that Mack looked at Willa and made her afraid, that was all that needed to be said. The decision to arrest and prosecute Mack was made right there on the spot in the Boswell's home. The authorities went to find Mack. It didn't take them long to locate Mack because he was doing what he always did. He was working in the field. When the police went to arrest Mack, they found him with his trailer loaded with hay at a neighboring farm. Mack was in the field working. They questioned Mack about Willa's complaint and how she said that he stared at her. Mack said that he went to the Boswell's farm to see if he could borrow a trailer for his hay from Mr. Boswell. He said he looked for Mr. Boswell around the yard and couldn't find him. Mack said he saw one of Mr. Boswell's kids walking and carrying a hoe, and that he walked across the cornfield to find Mr. Boswell. When he saw the 3 Boswell boys in the distance, he went back to his car and left. Mack thought that Willa was one of the boys. Mack left the Boswell's farm and went down the road to a man named Rome Jones' farm and rented the trailer from him. And then he went to the Simpsons farm and loaded the hay. This should have ended the investigation right there.
That's what I was gonna say, because if he already, okay, so it's not who I thought it was, boom, let me go check somebody else. All behind a possible misunderstanding, we could say this is what happened. It could have been a misunderstanding. Still, we weren't there, we don't know. But for recklessly eyeballing a white woman, this is what this man's gonna have to go through.
Mack had all the evidence and the witnesses to prove that what he said was true. But it didn't matter what Mack said. When it came to this allegation, there was no way that he was getting out of this. Jim Crow demanded a pound of flesh to be given. Mack was arrested right there. After Mack was arrested, he was taken back to the Boswell home. The sheriff's deputies left Mack locked inside of a hot car while they went inside and talked to Willa and her family for over an hour. It was as if they were making sure they had their story straight. After that, they took Mack to the jail in Yanceyville. The deputies told Mack that he better confess to trying to violate 17-year-old Willa. Mack told them he had no idea what they were talking about. He told them he was only there to rent the trailer for Mr. Boswell. Mack told them he didn't even know the Boswells had a daughter. The criminal proceedings against Mack moved quickly.
I mean, it sounds about right, because when she got there, she had to ask her brothers who he was, and they said they knew him. So it sounded like the man was telling the truth to me.
Luckily, Mack was able to get E. Frederick Upchurch to represent him. He was a 76-year-old white attorney in Yanceyville who was well known and respected. His son, Frederick Jr., also known as Fritz, joined his father on Mack's case. The father and son team thought that Mack's case was bogus and were determined to do all that they could to vindicate Mack. Even though the Upchurches believed the charges against Mack were ridiculous, the prosecutor did not. The prosecutor was a man named W. Banks Horton, and he wanted Mack to be convicted and put in jail. Upchurch Sr. did not believe that Horton had a strong case against Mack and tried to get the prosecutor to drop the charges before emotions and tensions escalated and the case became well known. But Horton refused. Mack's case was going forward and there was nothing that could be done to stop it. Mack was arraigned in the Recorder's Court of Caswell County. These were courts that were known as general law courts. They had more jurisdiction than the Justice of the Peace Court, but not as much as a trial-level superior court. Many times, judges in Recorder's Court had no legal training at all. Mack was charged with intending to violate 17-year-old Willa Jean Boswell. Mack stayed in jail for 4 days until the Upchurches could pay his $1,500 bond. But after Mack came to court, the prosecutor asked that his bond be raised to $1,800 because he knew that Mack and his family could not come up with that money. Mack was released after they were able to pay the new bond. There was talk in town that a mob was going to come to Mack's house and lynch him. At Mack's trial in the Recorder's Court, Judge Ralph Vernon presided over the trial. He was a farmer with no legal training and didn't even graduate from high school. The trial in the courtroom had all of the hallmarks of segregation.
That's crazy.
The front of the courthouse had a Confederate monument. In the courtroom, 2 Bibles were used as swearing witnesses. One new one for whites and one old beat up one for black people. The prosecution's star witness was Willa Jean Boswell. Willa Jean,
I mean, she don't even look attractive, and I ain't finna get into that. But they used 2 Bibles, a new one for whites and an old dusty one for blacks. Like, come on, man. That's how y'all felt.
Jean testified about how scared she was from Mack eyeballing her. Willa Jean even broke down in tears on the witness stand as she said how had it been anyone else other than Mack Ingram, she would not have been scared. But because Mack kept looking at her as she was walking, he frightened her. But she admitted that Mack never got within 75 feet of her and never touched her. Prosecutor W. Banks Horton argued to the court that Mack must be convicted and that young womanhood must be protected from black people. He used a racial slur when referring to black people. Before rendering his verdict, Judge Vernon reduced Mack's charge to be in compliance with a 1947 North Carolina Supreme Court decision that held that non-touching incidents were not acts of violating someone. After this, Judge Vernon found Mack guilty and sentenced him to the maximum sentence allowed, 2 years in prison. The Upchurches immediately filed an appeal to the Superior Court. But the Upchurches were not alone in their fight to clear Mack's name. That is when the NAACP got involved. It sent attorneys Conrad Pearson, Martin A. Martin, Spotswood Robinson III, and Robert L. Carter to help with Mack's case. Before I continue with this story, I have to tell you about these black lawyers. They're important figures in the civil rights movement, and I don't want to move on without telling you at least a little bit about them. Pearson.
They gave this man 2 years just for looking at this woman. Like I say, even though he didn't get close up on her, she said that he didn't get close up on her. He didn't do anything to her. He didn't say nothing to her or nothing. Just because he looked at her.
Martin and Robinson and Carter were veteran civil rights attorneys who had spent years challenging segregation and defending Black people in racially charged cases. Conrad Pearson was a North Carolina native and a Howard Law graduate. He was trained under Charles Hamilton Houston, the dean of Howard Law School and the mentor to Thurgood Marshall. Pearson became North Carolina's first NAACP legal defense fund attorney. In 1933, he led Holcutt versus Wilson, the first lawsuit to integrate a white university in the South. Martin A. Martin, also a Howard Law graduate, was the first Black trial attorney in the U.S. Department of Justice and played a major role in dismantling segregation. Along with Robinson, he helped to defend the Martinsville Seven, a group of Black men who were sentenced to death for allegedly attacking a white woman in Virginia. Spotswood Robinson, who was another Howard Law graduate and a great legal strategist, co-led the case of Brown versus the Board of Education, and he helped to dismantle school segregation nationwide. His legal brilliance led to his appointment as the first Black federal district judge in Washington, D.C., and later as the first Black judge on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia, where he helped to shape constitutional law for decades. Robert L. Carter was one of Thurgood Marshall's closest legal strategists, and he played a pivotal role in the Brown versus the Board of Education case. He was the one who introduced the social science evidence that helped to persuade the U.S. Supreme Court to strike down school segregation.
Do y'all think we were better segregated, or do you think integrating made it better for us? Leave y'all comments below. I asked that because when you think about all the things that our people had, doctors, lawyers, engineers, scientists, mathematicians, various different educators of different fields. I mean, just all this greatness. And look at us today. So, I mean, do you think integration helped us, or do you think segregation was better?
Over his career, he argued 22 cases before the U.S. Supreme Court and won 21 of them, and fought against racial discrimination in housing and employment and voting rights. His contributions to civil rights law led to his appointment as a federal judge for the Southern District of New York, where he continued to shape legal precedent in cases involving racial justice. Together, these four legal giants brought their expertise to fight yet another racist prosecution in Mack's case. It was Pearson who told the NAACP that it should get involved in Mack's case and that it was a sham. Take a look at this. This is the actual letter signed by Mack Ingram, allowing the NAACP to come into his case to represent him. The organization not only prepared to mount a strong legal defense for Mack, but it also made sure that the injustice that Mack was suffering was known around the country. It publicized Mack's case and put out a call for funds to help support his legal defense. It published a small booklet with Mack's image on the cover. Its pages told the public of how Mack had been charged for looking at Willa, and even quoted her trial testimony. This booklet also provided images of Mack and his family. The NAACP wanted the world to see Mack as the father and husband that he was, not the monster that he was made out to be in the Yanceyville court. It wanted the public to know how ridiculous and unjust Mack's prosecution was. People from all over gave to support Mack's defense and to support his family. NAACP records show donations being sent to them to help Mack. Someone from Chile even sent 1,000 Chilean pesos to Time magazine for Mack.
Wow.
Time had written about Mack's case. Time magazine forwarded the money to Thurgood Marshall and the NAACP. Others gave $5 and $10 donations. People wanted to support Mack in his fight against injustice. Black people in Yanceyville believed that there was more at play in Mack's case than him staring at a white girl too long. One of Mack's neighbors said that whites did not like the fact that Mack farmed independent from them. Mack rented his land and he owned his own mules and tools. He was not on a traditional sharecropping relationship with white landowners that kept people bond in a modern form of slavery. Unlike a lot of other Black sharecroppers, Mack did not end the farming year behind on the white landowner. He kept most of what he planted. This apparently angered a lot of whites in the area. This was a sentiment shared by Thurgood Marshall. In the letter to Herb Nipson, who was an editor of Ebony magazine, Marshall said that Mack's case was one of the most important cases in criminal law because it demonstrated what can be done in the community or the South where Black people are often denied a fair trial. He said that Mack's prosecution was based on the fact that he had changed his status from sharecropper to a renter, and that this made him more important in that area. This was something that whites could not have. With the help of the NAACP, Mack's attorneys appealed his case to the Superior Court. At the same time, a grand jury was convened by prosecutor R.J. Scott. It was made up of all white people. The grand jury returned an indictment against Mack for attempting to violate Willa Jean Boswell. Mack's attorneys immediately filed a motion to reduce the charge.
All this because she claimed he looked at her. But even in the same sense, from 70 something feet, as the man said, he was trying to see if it was one of the boys.
Caswell County was throwing everything ahead at Mack Ingram
Videos of
in his
that
effort to send him to prison.
laws.
Mack went to trial a second time on November 14th, 1951. The jury consisted of 4 black people and 8 white people. 400 people came out to watch the trial. The courtroom was filled to capacity. Mack's trial became a spectacle. Teachers let kids out so that they could go and watch the trial. A Methodist church came and served lunch to those who were there. A local shoe salesman came and set up outside and sold his shoes outside the courthouse. Another man set up a stand to sell snake oil that would heal body pains. And it also became a political rally. Congressman Thurman Chatham came and gave a 15-minute political speech and took pictures with people who were there. All of this at the expense of a black man who was being unjustly prosecuted. Mack's attorneys took an interesting legal strategy for Mack's trial. They did not call a single witness in his defense. Instead, they focused their efforts on cross-examining the state's witnesses and picking apart the state's case. By doing this, they did not give the state a chance to cross-examine Mack or give the jury a chance to make an even more negative impression of Mack. And they focused on making the state meet their burden of proving each element of the crime that Mack was accused of. Everyone knew that the evidence against Mack was weak, and the state had no real case. But everyone also knew that Mack was likely going to be found guilty, because this was 1951 in Jim Crow, North Carolina. This was a legal strategy that was designed to create what is called an appealable issue when the NAACP appealed Mack's case, to make the appellate court focus on the law and how it was applied at Mack's trial. The NAACP employed this strategy a lot and had great success with it. Willa Jean sat at the trial unbothered by what was occurring. It didn't bother her that a black man was being prosecuted for absolutely nothing. She seemed to be invested in Mack going to prison. She did not waver or hesitate in retelling her story. She told the jury everything she had said at the first trial, that Mack stared at her and that she was scared because of this. During closing arguments, Mack's attorneys went at the state's case and pointed out how weak it was. Attorney Fred Upchurch Jr. gave the closing argument for Mack. He told the jury that the state's entire case was a result of Willa Jean's overvivid imagination and her father's concern and the police overzealousness and attempt to be Sherlock Holmes. Remember, Mack's jury had 4 black men on it, and as you can imagine, the jurors could not agree on a verdict. 2 of the black jurors, Walter Wiley and Charlie Gunn, refused to vote guilty and wanted to acquit Mack. The judge ordered the jury to try to reach a verdict. When they couldn't reach a verdict, the judge sent them home for the night and said that they would come back again in the morning. This was the first time in 18 years that a Caswell jury had failed to reach a verdict and had to be sent home and told to come back. But after coming back the next day and giving it one more try, the jury was still deadlocked and could not reach a verdict. The 2 black jurors would not budge and refused to vote guilty. Judge Julius A. Rousseau declared a mistrial, but the prosecution was not deterred by this. Prosecutor Scott said that he was going to bring the case again, and that's exactly what he did. Mack was tried for a 3rd time. Take a look at this photo. This is the jury, and you can see the 4 black men who were the jurors on Mack's case. Which 2 were the ones who refused to vote guilty, we will never know. But what we do know is that we are looking at the faces of 2 black men who dared to stand up to Jim Crow justice. And
that's crazy. You had 2 of your own willing to say that you were guilty just for recklessly eyeballing and looking at this woman.
Said no.
That's crazy.
No to an unjust prosecution. These black men were risking their lives and that of their families by doing this. We don't know if they faced any consequences for their actions, but we know that these 2 black men felt that they were doing the right thing and it was worth the risk. Mack's 3rd trial was originally scheduled for the spring of 1952, but was postponed because the courthouse in Yanceyville burned down. Finally, Mack's trial was held on November 10th, 1952. The 3rd trial was held before a different judge, Judge Frank M. Armstrong. Unlike the 2nd trial, the jury was all white. Mack's attorneys filed a motion with the judge to change the venue of the trial. By this time, Mack's case was getting a lot of negative press. It was also getting attention internationally. Mack's case was being used by communist sympathizers to cast America in a negative light, and also to cast negative light on Caswell County, which in turn hurt Mack's case. Mack's attorney said that he was not a communist and had no interest in furthering their cause. Judge Armstrong denied their motion to change the venue. Mack's attorneys then challenged the jury selection process. They argued to the judge that the way the jury was chosen without black people was illegal and amounted to discrimination. They said that black people made up 49% of the local population, but there were no black people on the jury and it was all white. The prosecution's response to that argument was that the 2nd trial had 4 black people on it. The judge denied that motion as well. Mack's 3rd trial went just as the previous 2. Willa Jean testified once again. By this time, she was married to a man named Edward Webster and had a 6-month-old baby girl. Willa Jean once again told her story of how Mack made her scared by looking at her.
How long did this trial last?
She even showed the jury exactly how it went down by drawing it out for them. She showed where she was and where Mack was when he stared at her and she was frightened. After the state put on his case, Mack's attorneys requested that the case be dismissed because the evidence presented was insufficient. That request was denied by the judge. When it came time for jury deliberations, Judge Armstrong gave the jury the law that they will use to guide their verdict. This is known as jury instructions. He told the jury that to convict Mack Ingram of the crime that he was charged with, it was not necessary for him to cause physical harm to Willa Jean. If Mack did anything by threats and a display of force that caused Willa Jean to perceive fear and danger and made her stop from doing anything that she was doing at the time, then Mack was guilty of the crime. He said this included staring at her or watching her to cause her fear. That was all the jury needed to hear. On November 11, 1952, Mack was found guilty. The all-male and all-white jury of 11 farmers and a gas station operator took just 55 minutes to reach their verdict. Mack was sent home to await his sentence. The next day, on November 12th, Judge Armstrong sentenced Mack to serve 6 months in the Caswell County Jail and for his prison sentence to be spent doing labor on public road. But the judge did something that Mack and his attorneys did not expect. He suspended Mack's sentence, meaning that Mack did not have to serve it. But there was a catch. Mack would not have to serve his prison sentence on the condition that Mack pay the court costs and fines and come to court every year in November with 3 reputable witnesses to verify his good behavior and that he had not been involved in any criminal activity. Mack's attorneys appealed his conviction to the state Supreme Court. Shortly before the oral argument, the North Carolina Attorney General's office joined the NAACP and asked that the Supreme Court scrutinize the jury selection process in Mack's case because it was in violation of North Carolina state law on how juries were to be selected. The state did not question the evidence against Mack or the verdict, only the jury selection process. On February 3rd, 1953, the Supreme Court of North Carolina heard oral arguments on Mack's case. His attorneys argued to the court that the judge was wrong in his interpretation of the law when instructing the jury. They argued that physical touching was required to convict Mack, and he never touched Willa Jean Boswell. All throughout Mack's case, Black people from across the country followed what was going on in rural North Carolina. Black newspapers like the Chicago Defender and the Pittsburgh New Courier frequently provided updates. Jet magazine covered his story regularly and talked about Mack's case in several issues. The NAACP's magazine, The Crisis, also wrote about what was going on and ensured that Black people were kept informed of this injustice. Thurgood Marshall also wrote letters to Black newspapers and publications all across the country, asking them to support Mack's case by publicizing it. The North Carolina Supreme Court reversed Mack's conviction. Chief Justice William Devin wrote the opinion for the court. Devin wrote that no crime had been committed by Mack. Even though Willa Jean was scared, Mack was always over 70 feet away. The fact that Mack made no sound, no gesture, made no threat, or took any actions toward Willa Jean and walked away meant that Mack had committed no crime. Right. Devin said that Mack could not be held guilty for his gaze or what he had in his heart. He said that human law did not reach that far. Mack's nightmare was finally over. He and his family could finally breathe and know that they wouldn't lose him for years as he sat in prison for a crime that he did not commit. Black people all across the country celebrated Mack's victory. Black newspapers ran stories about him being freed. Jet magazine, which had covered his story several times, also ran a story in its March 12th issue, letting its readers know that Mack had finally won. Mack's family never recovered from what happened. They lost everything. Mack would often plow for other Black farmers in the area, and as a result of this, Black farmers were afraid to hire Mack. Mack lost all that he had worked for. His wife and his children also suffered because of this. When Mack went to jail, his wife Linwood was pregnant. She and their 11-year-old son Houston had to plant the crop when Mack was in jail, and no one would help them. No one wanted to be associated with them for fear of what might happen to them for supporting Mack Ingram. No one would talk to them or be their friends. They lost everything they had in their community because of this lie. Mack Ingram died in Danville, Virginia on June 12, 1977, at the age of 67, just 1 week after his birthday. At the time of his death, he was working as a laborer in a tobacco factory. He was no longer a farmer. Mack's wife, Linwood, lived another 26 years without Mack. She died in August of 2003 at the age of 93. Willa Jean died in 2012 at the age of 78. She lived a long life. She was able to have children and have grandchildren. She taught Sunday school and was loved in her community. She lived a life with dignity and respect, something that Mack was robbed of. We can only hope that in the 60 years after she accused Mack of looking at her, that her heart changed, that she saw the error of her ways in the time period. Whether she did, we will never know. But what we do know is that for Mack and his family, Willard's accusation ruined his life.
If y'all got family, mothers, grandmothers, grandfathers, fathers that were born in these times, sit down with them and ask them. Get to know them. Ask them their stories. Find out what they've been through. You'll learn something, I promise you.
Ruined the life of his family. They lost everything because of a lie. Being black meant a life filled with injustice. You worked hard and kept to yourself, and still there was injustice. You were kind and caring, and still there was injustice. Injustice was everywhere. You could not escape it. You could not get over it. You could not go under it. You could not go around it. Black people lived and died in injustice. Mack's story highlights just how perilous Black life was during that time period. At any moment, everything could be taken away from you just because you were Black.
On that note, if you made it this far, hit that like button, leave a comment. But I want to add on that rest in peace to all involved. Mack Ingram's story isn't just about history. It's a mirror, a reminder of how the laws was twisted to criminalize Black men for simply existing. Reckless eyeballing wasn't about justice. It was about control, fear, and white supremacy. But we're going to make sure we give a big shout out to Julian Johnson for continuing to break down these cases with the clarity and depth that they deserve. If you're not following him, go check his channel out. Here at Helping Our People Elevate, we're going to keep shining light on these buried stories because remembering is resistance and truth is power. Make sure you hit that like, share, and subscribe. Let's keep building, educating, and honoring our people's truth one story at a time. Peace and love, family.